That's what you call a Tim Tam Slam. What these are Australian chocolate cookies made by some company. I can't remember the name of them. I'll just put a link up. But they're they're biscuits basically covered in chocolate. And what you do is you bite a corner off each one. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like. So you want it to kind of look like you bite each corner off. And then you dip half of it into your coffee, tea, or hot beverage. And then you suck through the coffee or beverage through the biscuit. So then your hot beverage melts the inside and then it becomes very soft, melted chocolate treat. I'll show you this up close. See what they look like. Then you bite an end off on each side. Like so. Then you take your beverage, you take the cookie, and do as so. And then you eat it. So you guys actually aren't here for Tim Tam videos. You're here for one thing. You're here for the travel advice on the Outback, or also called Ayers Rock, located in the middle of Australia. One good tip is that you want a large hat or wear a lot of sunscreen, because in the center of Australia is where the ozone layer is so thin that it's very, very easy to get sunburned because sun is coming through at a much more intensive rate. I was there in a t-shirt and it felt like 40 degrees, but after I did a few hours of hiking outside, I could noticeably see that I had a very deep tan just from being outside in one day. So if you have a very pale complexion or lightly colored skin, you want to make sure you're completely covered with sunscreen, long sleeves, or have a hat on all day because you will get sunburned. So the highlights of this area is Ayers Rock, or Uluru, which is that giant classic rock in the middle of the desert that you think of when you think of the Outback. And there's also a huge canyon ridge called Kings Canyon, which is a pretty sweet hike. And then there's another rock formation that I can't pronounce. I'm just going to put the subtitle right here. And then there's the McDonald's mountain range. It's not as big as the other three, but if you fly into Alice Springs first, it's about an hour drive away, and it's a cool little intro to what the Outback is going to look like. So on my first day, I flew into Alice Springs because you have two locations. You can either fly into Ayers Rock directly, but then you're going to have to be dealing with expensive hotels and properties. In Alice Springs, it's about half as expensive to stay a few days in. So I flew into Alice Springs, picked up a rental car, drove to the grocery store, picked up a few supplies, stayed at the hostel one night, and planned out my next few days. I did go and check out the McDonald mountain range for a few hours just to kind of get a taste of the Outback. It's only about an hour drive away, as I mentioned earlier, so it's not that bad. One thing to be aware of is how expensive the rental cars are. There's a reason why a lot of Australians typically tend to drive their own car all the way out there and back, because the rental car is about 2 to 3 times more expensive for one day as compared to other places, and then you're going to be spending so much on gas or petrol, as they put in their engines, that having a rental car for just a handful of days tends to be a lot pricier than you think. So just be aware of that if you're planning on traveling here for a few days. So I woke up at 8 o'clock on my second day to prepare to drive from Alice Springs all the way to Ayers Rock. And it's about a 4.5 hour drive. I did it about 5 hours, 5.5, because if I saw something cool on the side of the road, I wanted to stop and take a photo. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get to see any kangaroos hopping while I was driving. But what I did see was car wrecks for some reason. Out in the middle of Australia, there's a ton of car wrecks and they just get left. So over time, the cars just rust and break down. And they kind of provide some cool shots, kind of showing you should really be careful while you're driving at high speeds out here. Then another super cool thing that you'll notice while you're driving around here is Australia has these things called road trains, where we're used to seeing large 18-wheeler trucks driving around transporting goods with one, maybe sometimes even 2 cars. But road trains are much bigger versions of these trucks, pulling 3 to 4 of these giant rigs. So when one passes you, it doesn't matter how big your car is, your car will physically shake back and forth when one of these monsters passes you on the road. So it was mid-afternoon when I got to the national park. There's a small fee you have to pay just to get in, but that makes sense for this kind of area. But the rock is about a half an hour drive away. Took me an hour to get there because of course I was stopping and taking photos anytime I saw something. One thing to note in the Outback is there's these tiny little black flies that swarm you no matter where you are. They don't bite, but they just kind of sit on you, and it's the most infuriating thing because when you're trying to stop and take a photo of yourself, if you have a timer on for like 10 seconds, it'll be impossible to stand still without getting a fly on you. So most of my photos I was trying to take of myself, I would have to edit out like 5 flies that were sitting on my face because they just swarm you and land, and it's the worst. 2 things you could do is wear a lot of bug spray, or you could also have like a mesh hat around you so that it just basically covers the top of your head to the bottom of your neck in a mesh cover. But then that just looks really funny and odd in photos. So after I walked around the base of the rock for a while, I went back to my car to eventually make something to eat and then go check out another rock formation. And as I was passing the entrance to this giant rock, I noticed that they took off the chains to allow people to start walking up the rock, and I was just sitting there like, doesn't matter how hungry and tired I am, I have to climb this. So when you're climbing this rock, you do have to be careful because nothing is perfectly safe in this kind of scenario. There are safety lines and poles to hold on to and grip onto, but if you choose to ignore those and you choose to just run up the rock recklessly, you might slip and fall off, and there's nothing to save you. There are no safety nets around this thing. So since they opened up the chains right when I was walking back to my car, I was one of the first ones to the top of this rock. I also tried to take very little breaks to try to make sure there's no one up there when I got there. It took about 45 minutes for me to get all the way up to the top. So I took a few photos of me standing on top of this thing without anyone around. And it kind of like just set the tone of like how there's literally nothing here. It's just you, this giant rock formation, and then nothing for miles. So I drove to the other rock formation to just try to get a few photos at sunset and try to check it out, but I just really didn't have enough time by the time I got back down from Ayers Rock. And then I tried to take a few sunset photos, but it was a very kind of bland sunset, so I didn't get that many. Spent that night at a very expensive hostel by the resort area. It's about $40 a night to just sleep on a bunk, so that just kind of gives you the price idea for how expensive it can be in this area. On my 3rd day, I went to go explore the Kings Canyon area. This is a 4-hour hike, so just make sure you know how long you're going to go for. It takes about 2 hours to get to the center point of it, which is when you open up and you see this Grand Canyon that is Kings Canyon. But as you're walking through the canyon, there are still plenty of cool places to get photographs and cool areas to explore and walk around. So you're not just walking 4 hours for one thing to see. There's a bunch of things to see along the trail as you go. But as I mentioned before, bring a hat, wear sunscreen, or something to cover your body because there's very little sun coverage out here, especially on this hike, that the sun will be beating down on you. So you just want to make sure that you're safe when it comes to your skin. One thing to note is that in Australia, the car insurance that you might get for your rental car becomes voided after 6 p.m. And that's because when it starts to get dark out, that's when more of the creatures start to come out at night and they start crossing the road a little more recklessly than they would during the middle of the day. So because it's so often to see roadkill in Australia, that car companies just void your insurance after 6 o'clock no matter what, because the rate to hit something during the night goes up so much that they just don't want to cover it because they don't want that liability. After I finished hiking around Kings Canyon, I had about 2 hours of time before my insurance got voided, and I had a 5-hour drive back to Alice Springs. So I risked it anyway just because I really needed to get back, so I just made sure that I was super careful when I was driving down the highway, just making sure that I couldn't see anything moving about 50 to 100 yards in front of me because you're going so fast out there. Their speed limit was about 130 kilometers that if something jumped in front of you, you really wouldn't have much time to stop. So you just have to be extra careful if you're driving past 6 p.m. Thankfully, I didn't see anything. So on my 4th day, I returned my rental car to the airport and just took a shuttle back to the hostel I was staying at. Spent the entire day just planning out the next few weeks of my trip, because if you're going on a super long trip alone, you want to plan ahead as far as you can. But one of the main things I just want to talk about is all the interesting people that you'll meet going to a hostel, because it's not just you traveling around the world. It's kids of all ages from, like, I'd say 20 to 30 is probably the most common range, from all over the world, traveling and doing the same thing you're doing and staying at hostels. So you meet a large variety of interesting people. So that night I was just going to make pasta and sauce for dinner, and one of the guys that I was sharing a room with, named Mark Cooper from the Netherlands, had a bunch of vegetables that he still had in his truck. So we made a dish together, and it was this pasta dish that had zucchini, carrots, tuna. He threw an egg in, and it just turned out to be super delicious. So we just got talking, going back and forth just about where I was from, where he was from. And he had a super cool and interesting story. He was from the Netherlands, had a full-time job, saw something that kind of changed the way he looked at life. He sold everything he had, bought a one-way ticket to Asia, traveled through the south of it, exploring different parts in Thailand, then eventually got to Australia, bought an SUV, basically lived out of his SUV just driving around Australia, ended up at Ayers Rock just to check it out for a few weeks, and then we just kind of got talking back and forth so much that we just basically exchanged information and kept tabs on each other every now and then and just gave each other different suggestions. And because it was just such a cool person, that I reached out to him a few days ago to just get an update on what he was doing.
Hey guys, how you going? My name is Marcus and I met John in Alice Springs, and after we met each other I went up north to Darwin and then south to Perth. Flew to Sydney a few times, and I stayed in Perth actually. Originally I'm from the Netherlands, so making this big immigration to Australia was really nice. And yeah, I enjoyed here. It's really nice, and as you can see now, the weather is still good. So enjoy, guys. Bye bye.
So my favorite moment of this trip was getting to the top of Uluru and just kind of looking out into the nothingness of the outback. The reason I was in Australia was because it was my final semester of my senior year of college, and I chose to study abroad instead of spending my last semester at Carolina. And when everyone asked me why I would do that, why would I want to skip graduation, is because I never really cared about graduation in the first place. I would much rather walk across the outback than walk across the stage in front of thousands of people that I've never met or had a conversation with before. And that's just the difference between me and a lot of other people, is that I'd rather go out on an adventure and experience the world than literally just sit in a robe for 6 hours in the North Carolina summer heat watching people I don't know walk across a stage. So it's a very easy decision for me. A lot of people think it's a hard one or not the right one, but it's all about doing what you enjoy and doing what you want to do. So for the price breakdown, I recorded everything in what I was paying in Australian dollars. So I'm going to give you also the US equivalent of what I paid at that time. Currently it's fallen even more, so the prices will always change depending on how your economy dollar compares to that country's dollar. So in Australian dollars, the car was about $378 for 3 days. The hostel was $136 for 4 days. One of those nights was $40 because of how expensive one area was. What I paid in petrol / gas was $262. I spent about $52 in food, just getting regular pasta, rice, granola bars at the grocery store. And then I paid about $33 for the airport shuttle back and forth. The flight is always the hardest part because the flight depends on where you're flying from. So I was flying from New Zealand to the center of Australia, and that ran me about $605 AU. But as I've said many times before, is the flight will always determine on where you're flying from, so I can't really fairly give you an estimate for that. So for camera gear, I had a very simple setup. I had a Mark III with my 24-70, a standard tripod. I had my drone with me, but I didn't use it that much because it's so dusty and dirty here that once I took it out, it would just get covered and caked in red dirt, so I couldn't do much with it. So I had a very just basic camera setup. It was really just a Mark III and a 24-70 because I was very limited in what I could travel with camera-wise. So as you can see, Alice Springs is right in the center of Australia. So if we zoom in really quick, you can see that the national park is off to the side. That's about an hour drive away if you choose to go see that. Then if you look up Ayers Rock, it's about a 5-hour drive with some traffic, but there really is no traffic at all. But right around Gone is when there's going to be a gas station. You're really going to want to stop here and fill up just because it's such a long drive. That's really the only place you can stop at. From Uluru or Ayers Rock to Kings Canyon, you're looking at a 3.5 hour drive up north, and then all the way from Kings Canyon to back to Alice Springs. It's about 3.5 hours if you take the road to the north, but one thing to point out is you can't take this road unless you have 4x4 or 4-wheel ability. You have to take the bottom road, which is, it says it's also 3.5 hours, but that one's dirt, so you really can't take that one either. What you end up having to really do is come all the way back down here and take the one that's 5 hours long, because a standard car can't go across the 2 other paths, which you don't find out until you get there, so I'm just telling you now. So that wraps up my travel advice for the Outback. Some things you just want to remember is a hat, sunscreen, food that doesn't go bad in the heat or sun, and that it can get pretty pricey if you're renting a car and driving from Alice Springs to Ayers Rock, but it's even pricier to just stay at Ayers Rock in general, so it's really one you gotta pick one or the other. More videos on the other parts of Australia I went to will be coming shortly, as long as the other countries and locations I went to during my travels, but as for now, I'll see you guys next time.